Tonight on Nation to Nation, Nunavut is celebrating its birthday, and the Premier says this is its biggest achievement.
I think the fact that the majority of MLAs and the majority of the government ministers have been predominantly Inuit ever since the creation of Nunavut.
But has that been the same as for public servants in the territory? APTN's Kent Driscoll fact-checks our wide-ranging interview with the Premier.
For years now, it's been stalled at just under 50% Inuit participation, and most of that participation is at lower-level entry or term positions.
Also, a group of chiefs have now had time to review Ottawa's child welfare reform bill. They flatly reject it.
To be blunt, I don't trust government because of what they have done to us over the last 150 years.
Hello, I'm Todd Lamoran, and welcome to Nation to Nation. Nunavut is just days away from celebrating its 20th anniversary. April 1st marks the day the territory was created. The vast territory is known for its culture and language, but also the challenges it continues to face today. To talk about all that, we're joined by the Premier of Nunavut. Welcome to Nation to Nation, Premier Joe
Savikataaq.
Savikataaq.
Yeah,
Jeez,
yeah.
I murdered it anyway.
Thank you for having me here.
20 years on April 1st, I guess how will Nunavut be celebrating its birthday?
Well, the communities will be doing their own celebrations, and we as a government will do some celebrations, and I believe it's quite a milestone, and I'm proud to be the Premier at the time of the 20-year anniversary.
Why was it important for Nunavut to be created? I suppose what's been the big positive over these 20 years?
I guess the reason it was created was as part of the land claims negotiation process, where if the land claim was settled, then they would get their own territory, and they actually had I remember they had a vote or a referendum, and the vote was to create their own territory, and that was negotiated. And I think it comes from the fact that the Inuit want to control their own destiny, as to opposed to when it was the Northwest Territories, and it seemed like the government was so far away from the Inuit.
I suppose from an Inuit perspective, what's been the big positive from having their own territory for the past 20 years?
I think the fact that the majority of MLAs and the majority of the government ministers have been predominantly Inuit ever since the creation of Nunavut.
Of course, there's been challenges over those 20 years. I suppose what have been some of the biggest challenges?
I guess the one that's the most ongoing, and it's been in the news a lot, is housing needs, and that was an issue back in the creation of Nunavut in 1999, and it's still an issue that we are dealing with today. We just don't have enough houses for the Nunavut Mute that need houses.
Of course, last year the federal budget promised $240 million over 11 years for housing in Nunavut, but is that enough to keep up with the growing demand?
No, it's not. And I'll just say, for example, we need between 3,000 to 3,300 houses right now, as of today. And the money that we got from the feds for 2019-2020 is enough to build 83 units.
Just 83 units?
Yes.
Okay.
So we're not even keeping up with today's demand, and every day that demand is growing as our population grows.
Is there any way to do some sort of stopgap or anything to keep up with that demand?
I think the only way is that a big infusion of money from the federal government, because I mean, we're quite reliant on the federal government for funding to operate Nunavut, and within that operational budget is the budget to build houses. And not only that, but our construction costs are really high in Nunavut.
I don't know if you're down here in Ottawa specifically for that, but have you had discussions with the federal government? Because there was no more money in this recent budget from just a little while ago.
Yeah, no, I'm here to do media interviews about a 20-year anniversary with different media outlets, but our housing minister has always talking and negotiated with the federal government to try to get more funding, but we're competing with the First Nations and other people who also need housing there, and with Northwest Territories and the Yukon. So whatever funds we get, we do the best we can to use them to make as many houses as possible. Like, one of the things we do now is they build more 5-plex than detached units, because those are cheaper to build. They're not They're not as nice because you don't have your own space, but it's one of the sacrifices that we're willing to make to get the number of houses that we can be built with the amount of money we get.
Is the problems with the housing similar to down south, or is it just a question of overcrowding, or is it like the mold crisis that some First Nations are facing?
Both. There are mold crises now too, but in terms of it's just a lot of overcrowding, and there's nothing good that comes out of overcrowded house.
I want to move on to out of housing. Obviously, Nunavut faces challenges, especially with children in foster care. A lot of them end up coming down here to Ottawa. So what's being done to bring them home?
Well, that depends, because we don't have the infrastructure to treat any children if there's any physical or medical or psychological conditions that they have, and therefore we have to send them out so they can get proper treatment. And we don't have the facilities to treat them within Nunavut, and we're hoping to get some money so that we can have a facility to treat them. Foster homes are different. We're still lacking, but we do have foster homes, and we can take care of kids that need foster home. But if the child needs more than a foster home and they have needs that we can't meet, then we have to ship them to the south.
Of course, in the recent budget, there was a big announcement about an infusion of cash for Jordan's Principle. Have you thought about using Jordan's Principle-inspired program funding to force Ottawa to pay for these kids in care?
Well, even if they paid for them in care, we still have to ship them south. We need the facilities so we can treat them, and the resources treat them within Nunavut. It's not just the fact that we need infusion so that they can pay for it. We need an actual structure so we can keep them within Nunavut.
Can that money be used to, I don't know, hire more foster parents in Nunavut itself to keep the kids there?
If the kids don't have any mental or physical disabilities, then generally they are kept in Nunavut. It's the ones that we can't treat because of psychological or physical conditions that we have to ship down to a facility where they can properly treat them and hopefully take care of those issues. We are always asking for more foster care within Nunavut, but that is less of an issue than shipping the kids to the south.
I'm going to move on to another contentious issue, I guess, which is the Indigenous Languages Act, Bill C-91, and both the ITK and NTI aren't satisfied with it. I suppose, where does the Nunavut government stand on it?
We stand with them in terms of it doesn't have any Inuit-specific legislation in there, and we thought it had a bit more teeth in terms than what it has. But as a Nunavut government, we do have our own Language Protection Act, and we're working towards making Inuktitut the working language of the Nunavut government.
Should there be a special designation for Inuktitut, as ITK President Natano Bed has been pushing for?
For Nunavut, I would say so. There's, that's the predominantly Indigenous language spoken within Nunavut, so it would only make sense.
Of course, I've heard the figure that the decline in the language is 1% per year. You've pushed the date for K-12 for all Inuktitut classes to 2030. So what are you going to do to grow and promote the Inuit language?
In that situation, I'll go back to the bilingual education. Right now we have bilingual education within our schools up to grade 4, and we were supposed to have the capability to deliver bilingual education in grade 12 by July of this summer. And we're not going to meet it because we don't have enough qualified Inuktitut speaking teachers. And we're on a recruitment campaign. We have Nunavut education program out there in the community to train more teachers, but we can't get enough Inuktitut speaking trained teachers to fulfill our obligations.
Finally, I just want to touch upon the former Premier of Nunavut was livid about the Ottawa banning Arctic drilling. I suppose, where does the Nunavut government stand now on that issue?
Well, it's not so much about the stop it. It's just that we had no say. Like I believe our former premier had a few hours notice before the announcement was made, and this is our territory, and we're almost completely dependent on money from the federal government to operate our territory. We'd like to be able to generate our own revenue at some point so we're not so reliant from the federal government.
Do you think we'll be waiting another 20 years, though, for some of these issues that we've talked about to be solved?
I'm not sure how long we'll be waiting, but it's not the fact that we think we're going to drill this in the near future, but we want to be able to make the decisions ourselves, that if we want to drill or if we don't want to drill for oil offshore, that it should be a Nunavut decision, not one that is imposed on us by the federal government.
So April 1st, is it a bittersweet day, or is it still going to be, you think, an overwhelming celebration?
I think it's going to be a celebration. I mean, we've gone a long ways in 20 years. I think we've built something like 1,900 public housing units. Our graduation rate has pretty well doubled. Our government, Inuit employment in the government has gone from 900 to about 1,900. So there's stuff to celebrate. We have our Language Protection Act, and we have, when there's any legislation or policies being built, it has to be aligned with Inuit societal values, and I think we have a lot to celebrate. We have a ways to go yet in terms of our ultimate goal, but we've gone a long ways.
Well, it's been quite a free-ranging discussion. I want to thank you, Premier Savikataaq.
Yes.
I think I got it right that time. Thank you for being on the show.
Thanks for having me here, and I'm proud to be here as a Premier of Nunavut for our 20-year anniversary, and I'm very thankful that we do have our own territory.
Oh, well, congratulations on that.
You're welcome.
After the break, we continue our Nunavut coverage with APTN National News reporter Kent Driscoll from our Iqaluit Bureau. Please stay with us. Welcome back. It's a special time for Nunavut, but also, as we just heard, one of hard realities and of continuing difficulties. No one knows that better than our next guest. Kent Driscoll has been APTN National News' reporter in Iqaluit for 12 years. He's here to fact-check our interview with Premier Joe Savikataaq. Thanks for joining us, Kent.
Oh, thanks for having me, Todd.
The Premier boasted about how many MLAs are now of Inuit origin, but how does that compare to the public service in Nunavut?
Well, that is the interesting thing about Premier Savikataaq's answer. He was citing the high percentage of MLAs who are Inuk, and that's true. But on the flip side, 85% of the population is Inuit. The expectation of the government of Nunavut was that the public service would be 85% Inuit. For years now, it's been stalled at just under 50% Inuit participation, and most of that participation is at lower-level entry or term positions. Senior management is still very non-Inuk.
So you heard some pretty grim statistics about housing. How accurate were they?
His statistics are accurate, but to get the whole picture, you have to look at more than just the statistics and the funding. Like, his numbers are right. But the thing he's forgetting is a lot of the problem does come from local housing authorities. Each individual town has their own housing authority that's responsible for social housing. They have lists of eligibility that are not transparent at all. It's hard for people to understand where they are on the list and what qualifies people. And another major factor that's gone into the lack of housing in Nunavut, the last time we got a lot of money for housing, it was a complete catastrophe with the shipping. They were setting up CCANs in a way that all of the one type of item was in one CCAN, which is fine if you're building down south, but if you're building up here in the north, you want a CCAN that goes first the foundation, then the floors, and build your way up. So a lot of those materials were wasted, left on the beach, lost, stolen. So while the government of Nunavut definitely needs more money for housing, there's potential for them to do better with what they have.
The Premier also said, "We stand with them," referring to the Inuit organizations over the Language Act. But isn't there a growing rift between them?
It's interesting dealing with it's a brother-sister relationship with Nunavut Tungavik Incorporated and the public government, the government of Nunavut. And in the last year, the rhetoric coming from NTI has been more ramped up. It's been in line with what you've been hearing from ITK, the idea of Inuit self-determination, the idea of Inuit government. And it is a growing rift, especially on language, in between the government and NTI, our territorial land claims organization. Yesterday, I was at an event with Aluki Kutrik. She's the president of NTI. And I was asking her specifically about that relationship. And the way she's characterizing it is, well, there are some items that NTI and the government of Nunavut see eye to eye on, and those are going fine. It's the ones where they have some disagreement that they have to work on. So she's trying to be balanced about it, but the rhetoric has been increasing on NTI's behalf for sure.
The Arctic drilling ban came as a shock. How so?
Oh, did it ever. When he was talking about how he said a previous premier only had a few hours' notice, that was former Premier Peter Taptuna, and Premier Savikataaq was in Taptuna's cabinet. Now, Peter Taptuna is a very relaxed, even-keeled manager. He doesn't get too hot or too cold. He's very middle. When they only got a couple hours' notice that they were going to ban drilling in the Arctic, I have never seen Peter Taptuna so cross. He was furious, came out with a statement hours later. But you got to remember, Taptuna's background, of course, was his first jobs were working on oil rigs in the Mackenzie Delta. For him, that was like, he took that personally. So, yeah, no kidding. Premier wasn't kidding when he said there was only a few hours' notice about that Arctic drilling ban.
And lastly, Kent, graduation rates are growing in Nunavut, but is the quality of education?
Well, that's it. He was, Savikataaq was talking about how the graduation rates have gone up. That's true, but it doesn't paint the whole picture. What you've got to remember is people are starting to discover we're turning out graduates that don't have the basic skills you'd expect from a grade 12 graduate. Very few Nunavut students are capable of going from a grade 12 program right into a university program. That's why they have a school in Ottawa called Nunavut Civic Nuksavut. It's a program that takes Nunavut high school kids and then gives them the extra set of skills they need to go on to pursue more post-secondary education. And as the folks at Nunavut Civic Nuksavut, I'm sure, would like me to point out, that's a project that the government of Nunavut cut their portion of funding to last week.
Well, Kent, thanks for this update and talking to us about this.
Koy na meek, Todd. Anytime.
After the break, we're joined by the chief of the Onion Lake Cree Nation to talk about child welfare reform. Welcome back. Everyone knows Indigenous children are overrepresented in the child welfare system. There's new legislation currently going through the House of Commons that wants to change that. Called Bill C-92, it received the support out of the gate from various Indigenous leadership groups. But now some have had time to read the proposed bill. And that includes our next guest, Okimau Henry Lewis. He's the chief of the Onion Lake Cree Nation, and he rejects the bill as it stands. Welcome to Nation, Okimau Lewis.
Yeah, good afternoon.
What is your greatest concern with the bill as it's currently tabled?
Oh, we have a lot of concerns regarding that bill being tabled. You know, that's why we had, we got together as leadership to reject it, and we had a press release released on March 19th regarding this bill.
What needs to be changed to get your support and several other chiefs and First Nations support?
Well, for one thing, we have a big problem with the manufactured consent. We are not being heard as grassroots chiefs of this, we cannot condone anymore with these bills being, negotiated behind closed doors. And we have to be, involved, because it impacts whatever that they decide in these bills impacts our inherent jurisdictions over our children big time, and we cannot afford to, continue with status quo.
Ottawa says the funding portion of the bill will come in phase 2. Why is not good enough?
It does not. Once the bill goes through, it'll be out of our hands, out of our control, because once it's passed, it will fall under the Canadian framework, and then they can amend the bill anytime they want. So in essence, we will lose control. So as it is, we cannot. That's why we are totally rejecting it at this time.
The bill is supposed to give a jurisdiction over to First Nations. You don't foresee that happening?
To me, as a leader, to be blunt, I don't trust government, because of what they had done to us over the last 150 years, you know. And that the process needs to change. Me as a grassroots chief needs to be involved, you know. We need to take control of our children. Our children are being loaned to us by the Creator, as the elders told us. And it is us, and we only know what our children needs. For one thing, you know, they need to find their identity. Their identity is foremost to understand who they come from and how we are connected to the land.
What do you think of the AFN, for example, giving its immediate support to the bill?
Well, that's the big problem that we had as grassroots people, chiefs, leadership. I mean, you know, the government prefer to deal with these PTOs, these organizations that have no right to speak on our behalf when it comes to inherent right and treaty rights. And the government chose to, you know, that's the big problem. We're not being involved. So it's the manufactured consent that we have a big problem with.
The bill, of course, has to be passed before the end of June. Do you think it can be amended to your satisfaction before time runs out?
The time, you know, the time that needs, you know, we're on a time crunch here for one thing, you know, and the government, they're not going to be waiting. You know, even though the framework was officially killed at AFN Assembly past December, now what they're doing is piecemealing it through. And that we have a problem with that, you know, but we're still maintaining our stand and totally try and reject that. Because like I said, we need to go on a driver's seat. For example, we have our own laws at our nation that we have established through involvement of our grassroots people. And we need to. It's our laws that supersedes these bills that are being passed through the legislature, and they have to recognize and respect that process, what we have in place.
What's been the biggest impact of not having jurisdiction over your children over all these years?
A big problem, because, you know, I'll give you just briefly some stats. In Saskatchewan alone, I think there's about 4,000. Overall, I'm talking about overall, about 4,000 children in care, and about 97 to 98% of them are First Nations. You know, and further to that, I think about 1,200 children are waiting to, you know, regain that status which they have lost through being placed in foster homes. Just a quick overview of some stats. And even our nation alone, I think we have about a little over 100 that are being impacted. 53 are off reserve, being kept in foster homes that we need to get back.
Okima Lewis, I want to thank you for your thoughts on this topic. Thank you.
You're welcome.
That's our show for the week. Next week, the House is back sitting, and I'm willing to bet the SNC-Lavalin scandal will dominate the conversation. But if you missed any part of tonight's show, you can check out our podcasts. Go to aptnnews.ca/podcast. I'm Todd Lamoran. Thanks for watching.